A word on autistic communication. For many autistic people, a lot of the general trauma and stress of our everyday lives comes down to the fact that when we try to communicate, it is very often viewed very poorly by the neurotypical people around us. We might be accused of saying the wrong thing or being uncaring or unempathetic because of the way we tend to talk. There's a lot of miscommunication that can occur, misinterpretations, misunderstandings. And as you can probably imagine, when that happens every day, all of the time, it can get really, really exhausting and incredibly traumatizing. It's why so many autistic people develop social anxiety and end up becoming quite insular and isolated. Not because we want to be alone, but because it's just safer to be. But why is this? What is so different about autistic communication? Well, it's hard to say because, of course, all autistic people are different. It's very hard to pin down specific traits that appear to be the case in terms of how autistic people communicate. But there are some generalizations that certainly I feel confident enough are common enough to count for this. So we're just going to look through a few of those. Okay. One of them is probably the most famous of all. When people talk about autism, especially if they're not themselves autistic, they will often bring this up, and that is a certain directness, bluntness perhaps, to how autistic people often speak. And a lot has been said about this. The way I view it is that I believe personally that autistic people as a group tend to prioritise accuracy, clarity, fact, above all else when communicating. Which I think is fair enough. I'm sure having just heard that, you're probably thinking, yeah, fair enough. But this is the thing. It's prioritised even above what you might call basic politeness. And that's where problems can start to spring up. Because what it means is that an autistic person might prioritise telling someone the truth over how it will make them feel, over their feelings, their emotional state. Whereas you might say that some non-autistic people might prioritise that politeness and that taking into account a person's feelings above the truth. Hence, white lies are born. Autistic people might generally be less likely to utilise white lies. We might, for example, view them as immoral, maybe, or just pointless, or counterproductive, or all kinds of things. I know a number of autistic people who quite simply just refuse to do it because they view it as just being wrong. It's a lie. Not because they've got this kind of black and white thinking, but just because they genuinely think it's counterproductive. And when you think about it, it could be. You know, if somebody wants to dress up in a certain way and they ask you how they look, and you genuinely think they look pretty, not great, you might feel, that there is something to be said for not telling them that and for sparing their feelings. But, as an autistic person myself, I kind of think to myself, well, no, I can't do that because they need to know. I don't want them to get bullied or treated badly, or I don't want them to experience negative feedback or anything like that. So I've got to tell you, I've got to. And of course, that's that then. The friendship is broken and over forever, perhaps. We are often accused of just being too straight to the point. We do not go around the houses, as my dad used to say, and when you don't get to the point directly. Autistic people are less likely to use phrases like, if it's not too much bother, could you? Or would it be okay if you could? That kind of thing. We just tend to get straight to it. And that can rub people up the wrong way. That can make people annoyed. It can make people feel very vulnerable, I suppose. And I do understand this. I do get it. And I think there's a lot to be said for both groups, autistic and non-autistic, to understand this better about one another. The problem is, historically, autistic people haven't really been understood by anyone. And we autistic people are the ones that have had to carry the burden of that, and had to try and learn your way of talking so that we can be understood. It would be so much better if both sides put some work in there. If non-autistic people could recognise this, natural autistic technique and way that we communicate, and maybe not be quite so offended by it, and to see where we're coming from and to understand the drive that we have about, you know, that's causing us to be so blunt and so direct to the point. I don't think it's a bad drive. I don't think it comes from a bad place. It comes from usually a very, very good place, and it would be nice if that could be recognised. There are other ways that our communication can differ as well, of course. Lots of our facial expressions, body language, eye contact can be very different too, in ways that you might not expect. I think if you're in a culture that expects eye contact, then autistic people can really stand out, because we can often really just not want to do that. But again, that should be understood. It's not a bad thing. It's not like we're doing anything actually wrong. We're just struggling with the cultural expectation that some people have. Another thing, of course, related, I suppose, to the bluntness, is a distaste and a lack of patience for small talk. I know many, many autistic people who would never engage in small talk, as it's known, you know, talking about the weather. Basically, small talk is when you talk about something where it doesn't really matter. The content doesn't matter. And you're expected to just kind of follow a script. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Autistic people often have no time for that, no patience for it. It's just seen as being pointless, ludicrous even. And we might have more of a tendency to jump straight into whatever it is we actually really need to talk about. You might call it big talk, or the main point or the main thrust of the conversation. The trouble is, for non-autistic people, small talk does actually fulfill an aim, an ambition. You know, it does have a purpose. We can't ignore that. As an autistic person, I can understand that intellectually. It's just it doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't work like that for me. For non-autistic people, small talk works as a kind of little bonus way of just getting more friendly with people. And it works. So fair enough. But it doesn't appear to do that for autistic people. If anything, all it does for autistic people is throws up a kind of weird roadblock in our conversation, because once again, we're expected to not necessarily tell the exact truth. How many times has somebody asked you how you are, and you've said you're fine, but you've actually lied in saying that? That's kind of what's expected. So again, we get to this problem of, you know, being forced into a position of having to lie. I know when somebody asks how I am, I know what they want to hear. I know they just want me to say, I'm fine, how are you? Or some variation of that. But too many times in my life, I've forgotten that, because it doesn't come naturally to me, because I'm autistic, and I've actually been a bit too open and a bit too honest. And then, of course, I'm accused of giving too much information, of being too over-familiar, and that kind of thing. So again, it's just, you can't win. Constantly finding out that we're getting it wrong, and we're getting viewed negatively as a result of that. It's very stressful. So yeah, if you yourself are autistic, these are probably things that you've experienced. They could be stresses and traumas that you carry around with you every day. If you're not autistic, then just give this some thought and recognise that where we're coming from isn't necessarily a bad space. It might seem unusual to you and something that isn't exactly standard, but maybe it's okay. You know, maybe we can be allowed to be different, can't we? Maybe there's some spice of life thing going on there that we can all enjoy. It's just something to ponder.